Russia claims that it's winning. Pretty bold statement for a country that after 3.5 years has lost more than 1 million soldiers. Total gain in Ukraine for this entire period of time is less than 3% of Ukraine's territory. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at that claim that Russia is winning. Because when you look at the numbers, it tells a far different story. Consider this. Every 2 minutes, one Russian soldier dies. And attrition, it's just math. And the Kremlin is losing the equation. Ukrainian drones are regularly striking oil and airbases up to 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 miles inside of Russia. And when we look at these attacks occurring right now, we see that it's certainly not Russia that is winning. Just ask the Black Sea Fleet how they're doing. We see that Ukraine is clearly leading this fight. It is Ukraine now taking the fight to Russia. And now that over 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been taken offline, it means it will only get harder for the Russians. It will not be getting any easier. There's going to be less fuel, less exports, and more cash that they just burn and burn in a war that they cannot afford. The central bank is still holding interest rates at 18%, growth is less than 1.5%, and the war spending is going only to pay for things that get destroyed in Ukraine, like tanks. So the people in Russia, they're continuing to suffer. And that's why the birth rate is so incredibly low within Russia. In fact, it's the lowest it's been. Now there's fewer and fewer recruits, fewer people willing to join this clearly suicide mission inside of Ukraine. But the good news, as the situation is getting worse, we can expect the Putin regime will try to make things better. And given their recent track record, that will only make things even worse for the Kremlin. My name is Jason Smart here in Kiev, Ukraine. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post, and I'm also a national security advisor. So let's look at what's going on, what's actually happening inside of Russia, because they claim that things are going great, that Russia is getting ahead, that Russia is progressing. However, the numbers just don't agree with that. The numbers say that Russia is at a huge disadvantage. Now, as you know, the Ukrainian General Staff, it says that Russian losses have exceeded 1 million. And if you look at the other data, not just the losses, you see other things that are pretty surprising. Look at the number of soldiers who have run away and they have deserted. That number is very large as well, as is the over 20,000 people who have refused or been absent when they were supposed to show up for military service. We see that the Russian government doesn't have a lot of solutions. It can try to force people and punish them if they don't show up, but ultimately people realize it's not such a great deal to be in the Russian military. If you realize that you're going to show up, pulled off the Moscow metro, forced onto a bus, and given a gun and told to advance, how long do you think you would survive? The fact is, they don't survive for very long. So now that more people realize that, there's less interest to go out and join this. There's less interest to throw away one's lives. And it's interesting what that is achieving. Within Russia, we see it's achieving a few things. One, we see that the people in Russia are increasingly disinterested in the war. They're just not up in it. They do not have the spirit. But there's something else. We see an increase of a number of things like sabotage within Russia. We see groups like Atesh, which are continuing to carry out attacks on rail cabinets and things like that. They're continuing to attack facilities within Russia. These are Russian citizens actively revolting against the Putin regime. That's pretty dramatic. That's not something we'd expect. So though we don't see protests in Russia, we do see people trying to violently overthrow the government. But aside from that, there are other things that we see going on inside of Russia which are noteworthy. For instance, we've been talking for a while now about the increasing number of arrests. The fact that the FSB, the intelligence service of Russia, is arresting more and more generals from the military. Those arrests are a very bad sign if you're a military officer. You see, the Russian military is incredibly corrupt. So that means that there's in fact compromising material, kompromat in Russian, about essentially every single senior officer in the Russian military. So if you're the FSB, how this typically works in Russia is you show up, you have a case file, you've dusted it off, and you say, General, we've noticed that you've made a lot of decisions over the past few years, and you've decided to hire a lot of different contractors. But we believe that you were receiving a kickback. and you know that's going to be a long time in prison. Of course, the general becomes alarmed, and he's probably given options. Options such as, could you inform on others? Or options like, could you give us a percentage of what you're getting? And of course, the general will probably go along with that because it's better than going to prison for life and having all of his assets taken. But there's something else that's going on. It's not just the FSB that's working against the military, it's the military itself. This incredible corruption, this incompetence that has festered is making things worse. And we see that is pretty clear. Ukraine is carrying out attacks across Russia. And the fact is, Russia had never prepared for this. Russia, despite spending incredible sums, up to 7% of GDP, on its military, does not have sufficient air defense. Incredibly enough, Russia just had the hubris, the arrogance, to believe that Russia would never be struck. There would never be a war carried out like this against Russia on its territory. However, today, there is a war being carried out right now inside of Russia. And there's a third aspect of this. So we have Atesh, which are people trying to violently overthrow the government. We have the Russian military not able to protect it from the Ukrainian drones. But we also have Ukraine, which has, in fact, invaded parts of Russia before in the course of this war, such as Kursk, such as Belgorod region, and in both cases, stayed there for long periods. The Russians could not expel them. So imagine this. Russia is unable to guard its own borders. That is the quality of the Russian military. And we see that the Russian military is actually weak everywhere we go. Look at the Black Sea Fleet. The Black Sea Fleet has had a lot of problems. Famously, it lost the Moskva, its flagship. But it's had other impressive feats. Those include losing even more of their ships to a country that does not really have a navy. The Black Sea Fleet at this point cannot project strength. It cannot protect Crimea. It cannot guarantee the Russian presence in the Black Sea. Russia is losing all of it. And as Russia loses it, do you think that they rethink their strategy? Do you think that they go over this and realize, perhaps we need to do things differently? It looks like things are getting bad, and it looks like they might get even worse. Let's approach this from a different side. No, they don't do that. The Russians absolutely never do that. And the reason is simple. The generals today, there is not one of them, nowhere in Moscow, that has even the slightest idea how they can win in Ukraine. Because if they had an idea, they would have implemented by now. They have no idea how to advance. We see them rolling out these soldiers, forcing them into assaults, and them all being killed. Around 80%. That's a lot. So why do they do that if they realize that it's not going to gain anything? The answer is very simple. The officers are told they have to, at least 3 times a day, 2 times a day, it depends, to try to assault the Ukrainian positions. And so they do that, knowing full well that it won't change anything, knowing full well that they will not be able to make any sort of a difference. And in fact, they'll just kill their own soldiers. But they continue doing it because that's what the orders were. So Russia is not going to strategy to get out of this. Russia does not have a plan how to make things better. And now with the situation within Russia continuing to worsen, within Russia, more and more things exploding due to their own citizens rebelling against the government, they have very significant problems. And it's not just there, by the way. It's across Russia. Consider what we've seen in Dagestan. Within Dagestan, there has been increasing numbers of interethnic fighting. And this fighting, it varies of how it looks, whether it's just masses of people or things like gas stations exploding, which is happening quite a bit over the last year. Why is that? By accident? Or just cheap domestic terrorism? We see within Russia more and more signs the population isn't so happy. The population is feeling not just repressed, but that things are simply out of control. And the way that we know that? Through economic data. We can tell what they're doing. How many Russians are searching for extra jobs? About half of them. Now, considering the unemployment rate within Russia is only about 2.2%, it's incredibly low, which is actually too low. It's an indication of very high inflation, not a super economy. And the fact that so many people are looking for second jobs is an indication that the money that they get for their jobs simply cannot pay the bills. The money doesn't have the same value it used to have. So Russia's an economic disaster. At home, it has people trying to violently overthrow the government. Within the regions, there are ethnic groups trying to kill the other ethnic groups. The Russian military is failing to recruit new soldiers. The FSB is trying to arrest and throw into prison the generals of the Russian military. We have simultaneously Vladimir Putin, who disappears for long periods of time, which is typical, because whenever there's a problem, he has a tendency of running away. Typical of a weak coward like he is. But there's something else in this as well. There's also the fact that Russia does not have the capacity to continue fighting this war. Russia has thrown everything it has at this, and at this point, it cannot continue. Increasingly, it seems that the Putin regime is much more brittle than many people thought. And in this infighting within Russia, these problems that just get worse and worse by the day, they are just coming back to haunt him. Because Vladimir Putin, being a coward, never addressed them. He never took care of the economic problems they have in Russia. He never did anything to take care of the military, to improve it, to build a modern military. He just assumed this corrupt scheme that he was running, where he was the mafia don, as long as everybody got 1%, everything was okay. It works during peacetime. But when you actually need that military, you actually need trained soldiers to be able to wage war. Well, he doesn't have this. His entire corrupt system was created in such a way where they were never provided. They were never created. So ultimately, when we look at what's going wrong in Russia today, more than Ukraine causing problems and more than the people trying to violently overthrow the Putin regime from within Russia, there's one person I would say is actually more responsible for the problems in Russia than anyone else. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin himself, personally, is responsible for the disaster, the burning dumpster fire that is Russia, because he chose throughout the last 25 years to rob his own population, to rob it of a future, and to invade a sovereign nation. And now, he's finding out what those consequences really look like. No matter what anyone tells you, Russia is not winning. Russia is losing, and Russia will lose. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with others. Please tell other people about this video, this channel, and leave your comments below. I'm keen to see what you think. Who do you think was responsible for Russia turning out this way? If you had to name a name, whose name would you name? As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.